Hi, welcome to Caribou Country Lifestyle. My name is Cheryl, and this is my sister Sandy.
Hi there.
And we want to talk to you about Zone 3 and what are the similarities and what are the differences that we find, as we are both Zone 3, but two provinces apart. Like, I live in the Caribou, which is in the interior of British Columbia, and you are?
I am in north central Saskatchewan.
We've been putting our gardens in the beginning of the season. I seem to be able to access my garden a lot sooner than you can because
you're in raised beds and outside the weather, but you have the raised beds, and I am predominantly in ground. I am just starting to introduce. I had a few raised beds this past season, and I'm enjoying it. I would like to put a few more in, but that's a huge difference. In ground and raised beds.
Because I know this year I had my garden put in mostly by the end of May.
And I didn't get started putting my garden in until the beginning of June.
Almost like even into the second week you were still putting stuff in.
You were telling me like, okay, things that you put in even sooner early. Because you had them in April. You had some stuff in.
There was some stuff. There are some vegetables that you can put in 5 weeks before your last frost, and you couldn't even think about getting in your garden to be able to do that.
Not the in-ground.
No.
The few raised beds I had, though, they still, my going into my raised beds was still at least 2 weeks to 2.5 weeks after you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, that there, and also for your in-ground, though, you had to wait until it dried up.
Yes. We didn't have a bunch of snow last year, but the big thing, we farm in Saskatchewan, and so the big garden has to go in before I can get to put my little garden in. And we finished seeding, and the day after we finished seeding, we got an inch of rain in 24 to 36 hours, and that kept me out of my garden. I couldn't till, I couldn't put any seeds in until I believe about the 8th of June.
Yeah, and I already had pretty much everything had been planted, and with me being able to get in there before my last frost, because my projected last frost was supposed to be June the 2nd, but the year before that I had my garden in sooner than June the 2nd as well, and so I kind of just went on what had happened in the previous year. I think yours comes
along a lot quicker too.
Yeah,
your raised beds warm quicker than a 4x8 or a 4x10 raised bed is going to heat up a lot quicker than 30 feet by 100 feet of in ground.
And I mean, and the whole reason that I even put the raised beds in there was just to be able to access and get in there sooner.
And I've watched that, and it's like, oh man, I wish.
Yeah.
I just wish.
Yeah.
So now we concentrate on it, and our wish is starting to come true.
Yep. Yeah. And I mean, for my raised beds, I do a lot of, it's half compost and half garden soil in the raised beds as well. And that works out really well. for my plants too. They absolutely love the mix of the two. Then we look at the end of the season,
Right.
and again,
Your season is extended
I'm
because it stays warm.
still in my garden at the end of the season, and I'm going into the third week of October, and
Yeah.
I'm still picking kale, but kale is a frost hardy plant, so it is going to last longer. But I still had my tomatoes out in the garden in the middle of October, and before I finally brought them in, they still, a lot of them still weren't ripe, and I was still having to bring them in and let them finish ripening in the house. But I mean, I still had it, and that a lot of what that problem was because we had a really cold, wet spring, and that set back
Yeah,
a
I
lot
think
of
it
my
was,
plants, and I even had to reseed some of my
Yeah, I
my
didn't-
beets and my carrots. I had to reseed them too.
but a lot of my plants that I had started in the house and I had taken out to my little greenhouse to harden off, keep growing, give me some room in my house. They were set back because they stayed in their little seedling pots that much longer than they really needed, and they were set back.
And I mean, even when it is so wet for you, you can't even get in the garden
No, I can't.
to do anything. And for me, I can get into the garden as well because we have bark mulch in all of our paths, and even in the no dig raised beds down below, my longer beds, we have bark mulch in between those paths, so I still can get in there.
Yeah.
I can still plant, I can still access
And
my
I-
garden.
And I sit there and I drool and I moan and I wish that I was in that situation. But my garden is predominantly in ground, and it has to warm up. It has to dry out so that I can till up my garden. It is got a clay.
Base.
It's a clay base in my soil, so it's a heavy soil. It's very rich. It's wonderful for the plants that you get to come along, but it hangs on to the moisture. It compacts a lot. So
That's where the tilling, you have to do the tilling.
I have to get out there and I have to till the whole thing before I can even think about, and it has to dry out enough to till it.
Yeah.
So then I can start making my rows and putting
So
my
you
plan.
get, it seems like another setback after another setback. And it's totally trying to find that balance
Yes.
as well.
Yeah. The watching you and what you can produce in your raised beds is really been the push for me, because I see what you can produce in there and how well it works for you. But in my situation, I don't think I could be all raised beds. I think raised beds has advantages
space,
for
too.
me, as well as my in-ground has advantages for me. And then this year I'm looking at introducing a small scale high tunnel. It's only going to be 10 foot wide by 16 foot long, so it's not going to be huge, but it's another experiment to see how can that lengthen my season for me. And then I have a new greenhouse coming. Again, it's not really huge, but it will have more ventilation, so I think we'll be able to get a grip on keeping it warm enough that the plants like it, but not baking them.
Yeah, getting that airflow going through
Yeah.
both the high tunnel and the greenhouse. I would absolutely love to have a greenhouse,
Yep.
a high tunnel.
It's actually our hired man on our farm. He had a pop-up garage frame that he didn't have any use for, and so this winter we're going to source some greenhouse plastic
Yeah.
and put that over top, and we'll see how that works.
Yeah, and I mean, another difference that we have is watering. Like,
Yeah.
I have to hand water everything practically. I think the only thing that I actually have a sprinkler for is over in my orchard side. I have a sprinkler set up for that now, but we have no irrigation system set up. And so I'm hand watering all my raised beds. And when it's warm out there, you're hand watering every day. Every stinking day. You have quite the watering setup.
Yes, and it is all thanks to my husband. I am so happy that he loves me this much, that he set up a couple of very high-powered, well, I guess maybe not high-powered, high-coverage
Yeah, high coverage.
sprinklers for me, and 2 sprinklers will cover my 35 by 100-foot garden, and I set a timer. I start and 30 minutes I come turn it off, and everything there is an overlap to it, so everything's gotten a good drink, and I go through about in between 400 and 500 gallons in 30 minutes.
Wow. Yeah, I set my sprinkler for 30 minutes as well. But when I'm out hand watering, I'm probably out there for an hour and a half.
Yeah.
Hand watering everything, because I'm also hand watering those long raised no-till beds as well. And they are 3 feet wide by 33 feet long. Mm-hmm. I mean, the one at the very back is slightly shorter, but still, you're hand watering all of that. Like I say, I can get in there and get in there to hand water too.
And I guess there too. So we've talked about how many downsides there is to my clay-based soil, and excuse me. But the other thing is that soil is going to hang on to moisture, so a detriment on one hand, but a benefit on the other hand. Whereas those few raised beds that I have in place,
They dry out faster.
those ones I also have another hand watering hose that I go and I've watered those on the days in between I do a full watering on the whole garden.
Whereas I have to pay for my soil.
And you have access to bark mulch and a lot of compost.
Yes.
So yeah, I don't have to pay for the dirt that's going into these raised beds, but I do have to get amendments to put with it to lighten it up in there. Otherwise, I'm going to run into the same problem as in ground if I just put
Yeah.
the same ground in there.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's offsetting costs for both of us, and I love the bark mulch, and I think it adds such a clean aesthetic value, as well as it's also helping you with weed suppression.
Yes, totally.
So-
it is so good for weed suppression.
Yeah.
We do put a layer of cardboard underneath the bark mulch, and that also helps to suppress those weeds as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then you put the bark mulch on top, and it's a good balance there.
I was reading, and one of my most prevalent weeds, that bane of my existence pretty much, is stinging nettle. And I was just reading, I'm going to embrace my stinging nettle now, and I am going to turn it into fertilizer tea for my garden.
Yeah. With the hog, there is a machine at my husband's work, and you put through the trees that they didn't use or just waste, and they run it through this machine, and that's what chops up all the bark mulch and turns it into bark mulch. And so then he also is able to get a dump trailer from one of his fellows that he works with, and he doesn't charge us anything to use his dump trailer. So the bark mulch is free, having the use of the trailer is free for us, whereas you have the dirt that's free.
Yes.
You also access straw too.
Yes. So I guess insofar as dirt, with my introducing raised beds now, I go out, I can get a bucket full on the tractor of dirt that I can bring to the garden area, and I take it out of the bucket and I'm mixing that and peat moss and my very little bit of compost that I have. I do a mixture that I'm putting into the raised beds. Then we were lucky enough that one of our neighbors that has cattle is getting out of cattle, and so he has a number of the large round bales, some bales that were 3 or 4 years old. So they're already starting to deteriorate, which is great to throw into the dirt. So we laid out the bale of straw, and then we had to actually chop it up with the riding lawnmower to get it to break up, and then I was able to till it in. I also have a second patch. I have the house garden, and then I also have the potato garden. So in the potato garden, I have my potatoes, I have corn, and I have all of the the vining squash and melons all go out there. And so we put down another round bale out there. We were able to bring in another one of our machines, and it's a heavy, high-speed disking machine.
Oh, wow.
So that went through and over the whole area, and it chopped everything up, put it into the dirt, and then I was ready to
Because that would
plant.
lighten up that dirt, and over
Immensely.
the years it decomposes into the
Yes.
soil too. So I mean, that is going to benefit your soil as well.
Well, and with the compost, Jamie is out there, from what I hear, he's out there and he is turning the compost by hand as he's turning. And I have been advised by my husband that I could make things a lot easier on myself, because we have some machinery that Jamie and Cheryl don't have at their disposal. So they've told me to get in the skid steer and go pick up my compost pile and turn it over and dump it down again, and we're done till tomorrow or the next day.
That's a lot quicker than Jamie going out there for an afternoon of turning compost. I mean, he enjoys it. A lot of what we do around here is a lot more physical. We don't have the machines, and that is one of the reasons we enjoy doing the no dig method, because then we don't need to have a tiller. We don't need to worry about our ground being
so hard.
compacted
Yeah.
by stepping on it all the time, because we're staying off those mounds of dirt that we have set up. And in the raised beds, we're not stepping on that
Yes.
soil either. We have a 6-inch frame around it, so if I have to get up on my raised beds, I'm just stepping on that frame.
Makes a big difference.
Yeah.
The compaction, and I find that even after a rain, I can have just tilled it up and planted everything, and if we get a good rain, a nice rain, not pelting or anything, but just a nice rain for 24, 36, 48 hours, that's going to help bring my garden on, it has now compacted my soil. Mm-hmm. Yep.
I mean, another similarity we have is pests too.
Yes.
I mean, yours is moose.
Yes. We ended up having to put, some might be familiar with construction fencing. So if you are in the city and you see construction going on, they have those metal mesh panels standing up, and they're one next to the other all the way around. So when I had moose coming through my orchard and pruning in a manner that I didn't appreciate, we decided to put construction fence all the way around. There's no way to put that kind of fencing around our house garden or the potato garden. It's just not feasible, but we haven't had too much trouble out there. And then as well in the orchard, it's the birds that they like my haskaps as much as I do. My husband and our hired man made a lean-to frame out of rebar. They welded it all together, and then we strung the bird netting over top of it, zip tied it to the framework, and
that went around your house caps.
and that was just over my house caps. They don't seem to bother the apples or the plums or the Saskatoons. It was predominantly the house cap berries.
Yeah, and so for us, our pests are deer. So we have a lot more fencing that we have to deal with because we literally have a thoroughfare of deer that come through our yard. We'll get out, wake up in the morning, go outside, and there are like 4 deer laying down on our lawn in the shade. And you come out and they don't even run. They just sit there and watch you walk across the lawn.
Oh, did you bring us coffee too?
So we have fencing around all of my raised bed garden. We have fencing around the orchard part of the garden. And we just have a wire fencing. We use T-posts and zap straps. And then when we put in the new garden with the 3 long raised beds, we put in fencing around that too. And same thing, T-posts, a roll of the wiring fence, and it's at least 6 feet high, the fence is. That is the only thing that's going to keep the deer out. Again, we have pest problem with birds too, but mine is for the strawberries right now because my haskaps haven't been very productive. They're only a couple of years old, so they're not very productive as of yet.
They'll get
But
there.
it's the strawberries. I have to put the bird netting over the strawberries, and I use hoops and then attach the bird netting over the strawberries. For Sandy, a hindrance for her is wind,
Oh, yes.
whereas we don't get the wind like you do.
It is like a lot of people have commented like there's lots of changes going on with our climate and all of that. This year alone, my apple trees, my plum trees were full of blooms, and then we had about 2 days of 70 to 80 kilometer an hour winds, and there went all of my blooms off of most of my blooms off the fruit trees. We got, I believe we got 3 or 4 apples and no plums, and we got maybe 2 dozen cherries. That was
Yeah,
it. And my house caps because
Yeah,
the birds
you
went
had
in
lots
there.
of house caps, whereas my sour cherry tree was loaded. And the same with my sister-in-law, who also lives here in the Caribou as well. Her sour cherry tree was loaded as well. I mean, and the whole reason that I even got involved in the vertical gardening, well, I got involved in the raised beds, was to do the vertical gardening and have my vegetables growing up as well as along the front of it. So we have cattle panels that we have purchased, and we'll do a cattle panel from one raised bed to another raised bed, and it'll be like an arbor going over from the one bed to the other bed.
Really pretty.
And then we also have panels that we've cut that 16-foot panel in half to have two 8-foot panels. And I use those on some of my other raised beds, and that is for staking my tomatoes as well.
And it was after I saw what you were doing with your cattle panels and your raised beds. I was like, okay, I think I want to do that too. It sounds like a heck of an idea. And so I went to get panels. I found when you started putting your panels and beds in, it was before all the crazy COVID price increases.
Yeah.
And so I know I probably spent at least $20 a panel more than what you did.
Right.
And I felt that the T-posts were just too much. They cost too much. So we went with rebar, and we can go get 20-foot pieces of rebar, and I think they're the 1/2 inch in diameter, and we can cut them into just 2 pieces, depending on how tall we need it, or 3 pieces, goes a little bit further. But my rows in ground are about 21 to 22 feet. So I'm using a whole panel and a 1/2 a panel to cover one row for my tomatoes.
Yeah, just the length of the row.
Yes.
Because you have yours in ground.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, and then I really liked the arches. They are very aesthetically pleasing. It's kind of like you're coming into the magical garden when you're walking down through the arbors. And so this year, even though it's in ground, I put up some arches, and I had 3 arches side by side in one row, and on one side of each of them I had 3 different kinds of peas, and on the other side I had 3 different kinds of cucumbers, and I had those coming up. And yeah, it's just so pretty.
What did you find, like, for this last year? What did you find that were the hardest, the least successful, as far as because of weather, and what type of vegetables did you?
Right. Okay, so I did have a couple of raised beds this year. I found that the onions did terrible in the raised bed. I also had onions in ground, and they did super. Like, I had really nice sized onions. The onions that I planted in the raised beds, they barely got bigger, because I start my own seeds. And planting those in, the bulbs on those ones in the raised beds were maybe double the size of the onion sets that you can buy at the store. They were dismal.
Yeah.
Then the other thing was the tomatoes. The tomatoes were terrible. It was like they were rotting before they were even ripe.
Wow.
So that was another one. And what else was a fail? I think those were the 2 big. Turnips. My Hikuri turnips, which I was trying for the first time. You told me what was getting them was the
root maggots.
The root maggots. Never even heard of them before.
And I mean, for me, it was peppers. I tried using Cozy Coats because I thought that would benefit my peppers into lengthening the season or making things warmer so that
Yeah.
would speed up their growth to produce peppers, but that just didn't work. And that's why I think, having a greenhouse would definitely be the way to go. I did have some jalapeno peppers that I had in pots on my deck. Those did really well, but not so much
Right.
my sweet peppers out in the garden.
That's the goal. But after you and I talking about, peppers really do like the heat. If the greenhouse stays warm, then maybe it's peppers in pots in there this year.
And like you say, as long as you have the airflow going through there as well, like sure they like the heat, but they still need that air, and that reduces your mold and your diseases that can spore, whether it's in the dirt or on the plants itself.
For successes this year, I would say my carrots were they were great. And after watching your one video where you were harvesting your carrots and you just give them a little shove and pulled them out, and I'm like, I want to harvest my carrots like that too. Whereas when I've been planting them years gone, they're in ground, and because the ground gets so compacted around them, okay, I can till but only so close, otherwise I'm just digging them up. I'm using at least a fork, like a garden fork, to try and loosen the ground
And
on
that's
both
how I
sides.
used to do it too.
Or sometimes I've got my little spade out there and I'm hoping that I'm getting to the bottom of the carrot to pop it out.
Yeah.
Otherwise, maybe I've left this much carrot in the ground. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
But they did super. They did absolutely super.
Like my tomatoes were still good, but because of the long, cold, rainy spring that we had, it basically set back the tomatoes. And I still got lots of tomatoes, but they didn't ripen as quickly as they did the year before.
Ripening is highly overrated.
I
Right?
brought him. I brought him in the house. Don't get me wrong. I brought him in the house and still ripened them that way. I mean, a lot of things that also that Sandy and I do the same. We do start our own seeds inside. A majority of our seeds are inside. Sometimes we're very overwhelmed by how much we have going on.
And we're already looking at seed catalogs.
And yes, I got my first seed catalog in the mail after our Canadian mail strike that we had.
Yes.
I just
Thank God
got
it's
my
done.
first T&T seed catalog in the mail. Was super excited about that. And I'm just can't wait for this next garden season. I'm always happy.
Okay. Now, you've only just gotten the very first gardening Bible
Yes.
for this year. Have you had a chance to look at it?
I have had a
In any
chance
depth.
to look at, I've only looked at the seeds as far as the vegetable seeds and what they have to offer. You were talking about looking at the tomatoes, or not the tomatoes, the onions, and seeing which ones
Yes.
are the best storers too. And I was looking at that and I had to laugh because I've started Walla Walla. Well, a Walla Walla is not a
It's not a
large.
storage.
It's not a storage onion.
No.
And the Elsa Craig is, which I did have those
Okay.
seeds, and there was a red one. I don't think I have the right one that I bought the seeds for, but there was a red one that I can't remember what the name of it was, unfortunately. But I was looking at specifically the onion for storage.
Saying, okay, I went through the West Coast Seed catalog online because I was specifically looking for storage onions this year. I would like to put in more, and I found in their catalog, they let you know that this is a storage, this is a storage, this one needs to be used up within a month or two. They're not going to store real well. So West Coast Seed had the white wing, the red wing, and it's a new yellow Spanish that, because it's new, I've not heard of it before. I don't remember what it was called.
And all of my onions that I started from seed and put them in the raised beds did not do well. And as well,
Okay.
they did not do well. So this next year, I am going to be planting them in my long raised beds, the no dig beds.
Right.
And I'll plant them in between some of my other plants. I haven't decided what, but that's what I want to do.
I was so jealous when I watched your video this fall when you were harvesting your potatoes.
Oh yeah, they did.
And
The plants themselves were huge.
they were your potato plants themselves. The foliage was probably double the height of mine, and you probably had double the amount of potatoes under any given plant than I did with mine. I did 3 varieties this year. I did the Carib, the Red Norland, and the Yukon Gold. And the Yukon Gold did well, and the Red Norlands did well, and the Carib, which has been an awesome producer for me previously, didn't even come to the party.
Wow.
Not a one.
Yeah, and my favorite was the Jennifer, because that was the very first, and they're the early ones.
Is it a red or a white?
It's a white.
Okay.
Christina. The Christina potatoes, they were, some of them were massive in some hills, and then others, here I went and dug up this one hill and it had such massive potatoes, and my husband had said, well, what, you should have did a video about it. And I'm like, oh, I will the next time I go and dig some up. And then I bring the camera out there and they weren't as big as the first couple of hills that I dug up, and I was, what?
But the difference too, like your no dig raised bed versus my in-ground potato plant or garden, I've watched you, and I am out digging my potatoes out with a shovel and a spade to be able to break up that ground again.
There's the
and you are out there, and it's
with my hands.
It's like you're digging in black flour.
Yeah, it's like fluff.
Yes. And I said, oh man, I'd like to be able to do that. But yeah, I'll get there maybe one day.
Yeah.
Maybe
we'll
one
get
day.
there. Yeah. So anyways, I hope you really enjoyed the information that we had, just kind of comparing the similarities and the differences, and just what we do in our garden. And I mean, each year things change.
Yes. Yes.
And you just don't know, but you never stop trying.
No,
that's for sure.
Keep on trying.
Keep on trying. So thanks for joining us, and we'll talk again soon. Bye for now.
Bye.